Welcome back, and to shed light on the latest developments in South Sudan, we are having over the phone our dear guest, Ambassador Soad Shalaby. She is the former assistant to the foreign minister. Hello, Ambassador Soad.
Hello.
Hello. Ambassador Soad, how do you see the current developments taking place in South Sudan?
Well, there's a big crisis that took place in Juba, South Sudan, since July. Since this year's July, there were 3 days of intense fighting, and it resulted in the death of many civilians and people. And from the UN missed the United Nations mission for peacekeeping, and the collapse of the fragile peace agreement between the president of South Sudan, Salva Kiir, and his former first Vice President Riek Machar.
Indeed, yes.
This crisis has led to an investigation. Of course, there was an independent special investigation report that was forwarded to the UN, and the report shows a lot of violations from the government and for human rights. So this crisis could lead to what happened in Rwanda, the genocide, and we all have very bad memories, very shocking memories of the genocide in Rwanda. That's why the UN is alerting the whole world that the situation in South Sudan is very critical.
Yes.
It's crucial that there should be interference from the international community to stop the ethnic cleansing that is starting, and it is going to be really very difficult if it continues in this situation. There would be a lot of loss of lives and sexual violence, and the government is unable to control the situation.
Yes.
So there is chaos, and there is a lot of uncontrollable looting and challenges that happened from the challenges to the government that it's unable to control the situation, and that is why the recommendation of the special investigation findings should be respected, and the government should stop all the unlawful procedures and decisions that they are taking against against the humanitarian law.
Yes. Ambassador Soad, why has not mediation up till that moment to do concrete steps on the ground in order to bring the situation in South Sudan under control? We have seen mediation for years after this moment, and yet the situation is developing. We are afraid of a repetition of the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. So how do you see the scene from here?
Yes, this is what should happen now. It should have been happening, because there is a UN special representative there, and she is trying, and the government should really seek help from the friendly countries that are around in order to stop this attack from the attack that is Machar's troops, because they are all armed troops, and they are going to really spoil the agreement that has happened. And we're talking about a democratic nation that has started, and there was a lot of support to South Sudan since its independence.
Yep.
So that is not the way it should have been. There should be very close international cooperation, international interference, in mediation, and in helping the government in order to get over this military violence.
Indeed.
Because actually protection of civilians is crucial.
Yeah, of course.
It cannot be tolerated until there is mediation from friendly countries. And of course, Egypt is one of the countries that should also interfere in order to restore the situation to a peaceful one and protect civilians from hazardous killings.
Of course, Ambassador Soad Shalaby, former assistant to the foreign minister, thank you very much for your precious input. And of course, the situation in South Sudan is quite alarming. And the report now that we are going to take is about Gambia. The Gambian opposition leader, Adama Barrow, is preparing to take office as the country's president after winning the presidential election, which ended the 22-year rule of President Yahya Jammeh in the West African country. News of Barrow's victory prompted thousands to take to the streets of the capital, Banjul, in celebrations. The details with Samah Sharif.
A top Gambian opposition politician and 18 other protesters were released from prison after an appeals court granted them bail on Monday, just days after strongman ruler Yahya Jammeh agreed to step aside after losing the presidential election. Ousseynou Dourbé, the head of the United Democratic Party Center, and 18 others had been arrested in April 2016 after they took part in a peaceful demonstration and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Darboe is also a mentor to 51-year-old Adama Barrow, the man who defeated Jammeh in Thursday's vote. Barrow won more than 45% of the votes in the election, while Jammeh took over 36%, and the rest of the votes went to a third candidate, Mama Kanda, with over 17% of the votes. Barrow has vowed to free all political prisoners and has urged exiles who fled Jammeh's rule to return and help him reform the West African country. After his win, Barrow hailed a new Gambia. The West African state has not had a smooth of power since independence from Britain in 1965. The Electoral Commission appealed for calm as the country entered uncharted waters.
Welcome back, our dear viewers, and back to the situation and the developing scene in South Sudan. And we are joined over the phone to shed light on the issue with Mr. Ambassador Mohammad Eshshazly, former assistant to the foreign minister. Mr. Ambassador. Hello, sir. Ambassador Mohammad Eshshazly?
Yes.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Ambassador Mohammad Eshshazly, the UN is warning of ethnic cleansing campaign in South Sudan, similar to the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. What's your take on that, and how such a scenario or such a tragedy could be averted?
First of all, the United Nations is too late in pointing to the dangers of genocide and ethnic cleansing in South Sudan. The ethnic cleansing has started in Sudan since 2010, when the SPLA, or the armed forces of the South Sudan, launched the campaign, and they called it the Shilluk disarmament campaign. And they attacked the Shilluks, and over 10,000 people were displaced, hundreds of people were killed, including women and children, in addition to rape and the mayhem and terror that they created. Before that, there were also terrible massacres. It started also in 2011, what was then called the Uror massacre in the Jonglei region, where the Morleys attacked the Nuers. Over 600 people were killed, and 3,000 houses were burned. children were kidnapped, and then there was another retaliatory raid by the Mordi against the Nuer, which also hundreds of people were killed. The significance of the Shilluk disarmament campaign is that it was done by the government forces, and it encouraged other tribes to launch attacks against their enemies. South Sudan is part of Africa, and it has the scourge and the plague of Africa, which is tribalism and racism. South Sudan seceded from Sudan under the banner of anti-racism. And they said that the Arabs were not treating them fairly, that they are being discriminated against because of their race and their tribal affinities. A responsible government should have worked to diffuse the sentiments of hatred between the tribes, rather than to accentuate these feelings. And rather than use tribalism for political gains between Riek Machar and Salva Kiir. I think also the media and the international community are to blame for their bias. No media, proper media coverage was shed on these terrible massacres that happened in South Sudan. Compare the media coverage of these massacres with what the Boko Haram has done in Nigeria. Boko Haram is a despicable movement. But what has happened in South Sudan is more atrocious than what has happened by Boko Haram. And because, you know, the international sentiment is poised against Islam, and because Boko Haram is an Islamic, or so-called Islamic movement, they had tremendous media coverage, where what is happening in South Sudan is to a large extent neglected by the media.
So, sir, how do you see this bias coverage or the bystander by the international media towards the scene there in Sudan?
As I told you, it is completely out of proportion. I mean, what is happening in South Sudan, what happened in July, is atrocious. The atrocities that have been committed, not against, you know, their enemies of other tribes, but against UN personnel, against medical personnel who are there to help. The rape, the killing, the destruction of property. And try to follow the media. And you will find that nearly nobody knows anything about that, whereas everybody knows about Boko Haram.
Sir, the UN says that the international community needed to speed up the deployment of 4,000 strong regional protection force, ensuring its reach went beyond the capital, Juba. How do you expect the deployment of the forces to impact the situation? And they believe that if these forces are deployed there, the situation could be contained, or nothing real could be felt after the deployment of these forces?
I think, you know, for the short run, the presence of UN forces will help in preventing, you know, the massacres that are going on. But this is not the remedy. You have to have real political leadership in South Sudan. People who see the country as one homogeneous entity, not my tribe and your tribe. So long as this mentality prevails, you cannot really solve the problem. The problem, as I think that what we are seeing in South Sudan today, that the political leadership on both sides, whether it is Salva Kiir or Riek Machar, they have disqualified themselves as political leaders. These are tribal leaders. These are people who are committing atrocities that should not be tolerated by the international community.
Sir, South Sudan's rebels have accused the East African regional bloc, IGAD, of supporting the continuation of South Sudan's civil war by accepting Kiir's decree of replacing Machar by Taban Dengi. How do we weigh their stance from IGAD?
Certainly, you know, there are certain East African governments who have their agenda in South Sudan. But I don't think that this is the real problem. The real problem is an internal South Sudanese issue that should be solved and will not be solved except by the South Sudanese themselves. The amount of hatred, the amount of non-acceptance of the other that is prevalent in South Sudan makes any solution or any external help really of no meaning.
Mr. Ambassador, the U.S. said the crisis in South Sudan needed to be averted by holding leaders accountable and imposing arms embargo. What would be the mechanism of holding leaders accountable here?
First of all, I think, you know, the arms embargo is a very important issue. If you look at Africa today, the problems and the massacres and the atrocities that are being committed there are the result of the spreading of weapons within the tribes, within the factions. This is true in South Sudan. This is true in Libya. This is true in many other quarters of. You cannot prevent massacres by adding more arms. This will inevitably lead to more massacres and more killing and more fighting. The countries bordering South Sudan have a very important role to play there to prevent the smuggling of armaments into the country. I think also that economic pressures should be exerted to prevent, you know, the South Sudan has got and has received tremendous amounts of aid from the West, the European Union and the United States for building roads, for building hospitals, for building an infrastructure. And none of this has shown any fruit because of, first of all, corruption, and second of all, instability and fighting within. Another faction is that there are in the diaspora, in Europe, in America, in many other countries, there are very well-trained South Sudanese cadres who can return to their country and help in the country. These people are reluctant to return because what are they going to return to? To massacres and civil war and infighting, or to an atmosphere where you can rebuild your country and build a better future for the coming generation.
Yes, sir. Sir, in your opinion, what could be the first step that should be taken now in order to find a common ground for peace talks in South Sudan?
I personally believe that the first step is to find new leaderships. The leaderships that are in power now in South Sudan, I believe, have disqualified themselves. The country has been now independent for several years. We haven't, over 5 years now, we did not see the fruit, in spite of the fact that they have received tremendous amount of aid that could have really made a difference in the country. After that, I think the international community has to step in to prevent the smuggling of arms into South Sudan and to bring the people who are committing these massacres to accountability. And there should be, as I said before, political pressure and economic pressure to put the leadership in the right track.
Yes. Finally, sir, how is the African Union dealing with the refugee crisis in South Sudan?
The refugee crisis is, a very, very grave problem. The countries bordering Sudan are not rich countries, and they also have their problems. Security, stability, economy. They cannot tolerate the pressure of refugees. I mean,
Indeed.
you have now Europe, which is an affluent continent, which is a rich continent. They are in deep trouble because of the refugees coming from the Middle East and Africa. What can the poor under African countries do with the pressure of more refugees?
Indeed, it's a very serious and dangerous situation on the ground in South Sudan. Hope that a real solution could be found on the ground soon. Ambassador Mohammad Eshshazly, former assistant to the foreign minister, thank you very much, sir, for your precious input, and have a good day. And with that, our dear viewers, we come to the end of this edition of Africa Today, where we have been tackling the recent developments taking place in South Sudan and the ethnic cleansing there and the threat of a repetition of the 1994 Rwanda genocide. Hope that the situation there could get to a better solution and a great situation, or a better situation for the people there. That was Mahisi Rabia signing.